Good afternoon. Take your seat, sit down. Good afternoon and welcome back to the afternoon session of the day 3 of the Business and Human Rights Summer School. This afternoon is devoted to the very important topic in the business and human rights realm, a very timely topic that is the fisheries management in respect to corporate impact on environment and human rights. It's an important topic as the already mentioned the proposal of the European Commission proposal for the directive on corporate human rights due diligence mentions the sea supply chain as one of the areas at risk of gross violations or gross negative impact on human rights. So thank you very much to all the panelists today for this roundtable, which will be chaired by Professor Giuseppe Cataldi. Professor Cataldi, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It is my pleasure to chair this roundtable. Thank you very much to Marco Fasciglione, to Angelica Bonfanti, Chiara Macchi, Marta Borgnon for having given me the possibility not only to introduce the summer school as the responsible for the University of Napoli Orientale of the Procida seat, but for having given me an active role in this very important and interesting summer school. Business and human rights. Business and human rights, I'm not a specialist in corporate, in social and corporate responsibility, but business and human rights, I think it is very important for everyone who in a certain way tries to make some research or study on human rights, because it is the a moment in which you have not only to give attention to rights, but also to duties, because, you know, human rights and business means that there is someone who has to implement human duties. You can understand. You can also answer to me. Okay, this is also important when you speak in general human rights concerning states, because also states are made by human beings. Okay, but we know that there is a system of institutionalization inside states that it has not been reached so far in other actors as firms, as enterprises. And so the connection with the reality of human being is much more, is much wider in this case. So there is a very tight connection among human rights and human duties. This is true also for what concerns the issue we are going to discuss this afternoon, fisheries, because we are going to talk of something which is very near to each one of us, not only for some more or less felt, how can I say, environmental attentions, for environmental attitude of each one of us, but because we know that when we speak of fishing, we are speaking of something which is, first of all one of the most important elements of feeding people all over the world. One of the most, how can I say, element of the relationship of human beings with the liquid element, with the sea. We have cultural traditions, we have environmental worries, we have feeding problems, and so on. And so maybe this is a crucial moment. Okay, we can say every day is a crucial moment. Okay, but in this specific moment, we are living after pandemia, which has also shown to us how useless is the human being to the environment. Please accept this paradox, because we have seen how, of course, we need the environment, but the environment does not need ourselves. Pandemia, now the war, climate change. In Italy, we are a very huge problem in these very days because of the lack of rain, lack of water, and so on. So it is really a huge problem. I personally have dealt with this problem as an international lawyer and as a scholar, in particular expert of law of the sea. I wrote a book in 2000 in French, Droit international de la pêche maritime, the international law of maritime fisheries, with two colleagues, one from Spain, the other from France. At that time, the situation was 22 years ago, was a little bit different because there were less worries concerning environmental issues. There were less, how can I say, problems concerning the rules concerning fisheries on the high seas, because we were still worried about what happens in exclusive economic zones, in territorial sea, but not yet so, how can I say, inside the issue of regulation of fisheries in the high seas, because the idea was still that the high seas is ruled by the freedom of the sea general rule. That was sufficient in a certain way to rely on the self-restraint of states and of, in general, actors concerning fisheries. Now the situation is very different, because that we know that also in the high seas there is a need of new rules. And new rules are at stake, and many international organizations are taking care of this issue in general terms of fisheries, but particularly fisheries on the high seas. We know that the era of the historical rights is something which belongs to the past. So now we are all in agreement concerning the fact that in exclusive economic zone, there is a special right of the coastal state, but also special duties of the coastal states. And we know that there is a need of cooperation and collaboration. Of course, we know that there are, someone I'm sure will take the floor also on this point, there are special agencies which have the special duties and also competences in order to give a sort of, may I say, international order to fisheries all over the world. But we are still under two main problems: IUU fishing, illegal, unreported, unauthorized fisheries, and the crucial problem of flag of convenience, the difficulties in trying to intervene on fisheries ships when the state of the flag is absent in a certain way we cannot rely on it. So the situation now has been complicated, as I told, because we have so many more actors at stake, apart states, apart big firms, and so on. But I stop here because, of course, these are issues which will be dealt by the panelists, because today we have an all-star panel, okay, except for who is speaking in this moment. I'm joking, but not so much. Okay, I just want only to stress one important thing, which is, of course, not merit of myself, but of Marco and the other organizers. The capacity, the ability of putting together different actors who are very competent in their own area of work, but we have different areas of work today that we merge in this panel, because we have, first of all, Celine Trevis, which is a colleague of mine. I don't need to introduce her to many of you who have already had the possibility to know her, even here in Procida, because she has already come here. She's professor of international law and sustainability at Utrecht University School of Law, senior research associate at the Netherlands Institute for the Law of the Sea, NILOS. And she has worked a lot on migration by sea and other issues concerning sea and law of the sea, also concerning in particular the Mediterranean problems, because we have not to forget that when we, all these problems I tried in some minutes to put on the table, we find them even more complicated in a narrow sea, in a closed or semi-closed sea like the Mediterranean Sea and like other Mediterranean. You know, Mediterranean means sea among the grounds, among the earth. So we have this is maybe the wider one, but we have other Mediterranean Sea all over the world. So in these cases, we have much more problems that in the ocean, because we have to put together a lot of actors and the different problems. So the Mediterranean Sea also deserves a particular attention. So Celine, she's an academician, as I am, and there's also Michele Scarpi is. I will introduce him in a moment. But the other participants, they come or from the private enterprises, as Federica, for example, or from international organizations and agencies also engaged in this area. I will introduce them as soon as they take the floor. So the first panelist is Celine Trevis, and I'm very happy to welcome her here in Procida, in the University of Napoli, University of Orientale Napoli summer seat, and in particular in this summer school. So Federica, the floor is yours for about 15, Federica, sorry, Celine, the floor is yours for about 15 minutes. Then the others will take the floor for the same amount of time. And I hope there will be a debate, because after the debate, I will like to give for a second step, a second moment, the floor to the panelists. So please, the important thing is that we have to move, switch, because the microphone is there on the computer.
Grazie. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Giuseppe, for the kind introduction. And thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me. It's really, well, it's always a pleasure to be back in Procida, but it's even more of a pleasure to have the opportunity to discuss indeed such an important topic. Sorry, that's awful. The light just, thank you so much. So as Giuseppe just mentioned, my background is the law of the sea and also environmental law. So my task in this first 15 minutes is to give you a bit of an introduction of the legal framework of fisheries in international law, and try also to highlight some of the sustainability issues. And then, of course, I hope we will have a chance to discuss a bit further some of the issues during the Q&A sessions. So, no. No? Su quale? Sinistra, no? Sorry.
Okay.
Computer says no? No? No, and it doesn't show. No, ma non si vede la slide. Viene fuori mezzo nera. Perché?
Che non abbiamo il PowerPoint qui. Quindi
Siamo
vai...
tutti col PowerPoint.
Lo so.
Ah. Ma non va avanti. Ok. Let's do it without PowerPoint. It doesn't matter. I hope it doesn't matter. So, as mentioned already by Giuseppe, there are a series of challenges that the sector of fisheries is facing nowadays. And the main reasons of those challenges are that fisheries is, well, first of all, one of the oldest activities at sea, even though not the oldest is navigation. Fisheries really become one of the core activities at the end of the 19th century and has become since really one of the major lobbies also of the maritime sector. It has been for a long time left to the discretion of states with this idea that the oceans were a sort of a big mine which could just be, excavated, and we could get the resources, and that resources could be renewable forever, and that there was no problem, let's say, of access to those resources. And it took a long time for the international community to, first of all, accept also the many scientists' opinions which were showing already the limits of that, the growth of the resources and the fact that they are not so renewable as we thought. But this long period of time led us to the situation that we have nowadays, where many of the stocks are overexploited, as many of the species are at risk of extinction. And also, over the years, many fishing techniques have been developed which are highly disruptive for the environment, such as the use of dynamite in certain areas of the world, or the use also of bottom trawling. So with some nets, they troll the bottom floor and they take everything which is on the bottom floor, so any type of fauna or flora. Plus, of course, the problem also of the bycatches. So the fact that in these big nets, you have many animals which are just caught in the fish nets, which are not targeted by the fishing industry, and then they die for nothing in a way, or they are harmed for nothing. So destroying, of course, the biodiversity of many areas. Let's see if I'll do it like that. I'm sorry that the slide doesn't work properly. I didn't know there was this problem, but okay. I'll do it in this. Can we just remove then the slide? Then I think it's easier, and you will just listen to me. Oh no, wait! I just put the maps. Yes, that, because we are talking about law of the sea. You need maps. So as Giuseppe mentioned, and I'm sure, I hope many of you are a bit familiar on what is the legal framework of the oceans. Maybe not so much. But our oceans are divided in many zones, and states have rights and obligations in the different zones. And one of the main zones is indeed the exclusive economic zone, abbreviated EEZ, which is a very important zone for coastal states, because in an area of 200 miles, they get sovereign rights for fishing. So they have exclusive jurisdiction to regulate fishing there. And in counterparty, they have obligations to protect the environment. The oceans have been divided in maritime zones and also in fishing zones. depending on the geographical area and on the species which are targeted by the fisheries activities. So states have concluded agreements at the regional level to organize fishing activities in relation to a species. Here you have, for instance, tuna, regional fisheries management organizations. So you see the different colors on how then states collaborate. Those are the non-tuna regional fisheries organizations, so-called RFMOs. A lot of acronyms in the fishing industry. So I'm sorry if sometimes I use acronyms, please let me know if I don't realize that I didn't tell you the full name. So those are non-tuna RFMOs. So you see how pervasive the fishing activity is, and it covers the entire oceans, including, of course, the high seas. The high seas are the area here. After you see this light blue around the coast, those are the EZs. After that, it's the high seas that you have in this map too. This is to give you an idea of how much of our oceans are within the jurisdiction of coastal states today. Okay, so in all this light blue, states have exclusive rights in fishing and other economic activities, also oil and gas exploitation, renewable energy exploitations, and so on, all economic activities. The dark blue is the high seas, but within the high seas, then we have the specialized regulation for the different type of species. What does it mean, the regulation for the different type of species? It means the states have agreed on certain quotas on the maximum yield, which is allowed for each state in a different type of season and in the different geographical area. The main issue is, as I mentioned earlier, that fisheries has been seen for a long time as an extractive economic activity. Okay, a bit like mining, if you want. So it was a really extractive economic activity where the environmental concerns have been slowly integrated from the mid of the 20th centuries, but really from the 70s, where we have the real first discussion on how to, in a way, balance the extractive objectives with the protection of the environment and of the species. Well, first of all, of the species that were targeted. And nowadays, we have more general discussions on how to protect the environment at large. So how fisheries also impact biodiversity, both including flora and fauna, and whether that should also create a series of restrictions to the fishing activity. However, the very focus of any type of regulation has been, as I said, the economic activity and then slowly balancing with the environment. The social dimension, however, of fisheries is really a most recent concern, which has not yet reached, let's say, a real agreement at the international level. We have a series of, well, I hope we can share the PowerPoint later. In the PowerPoint, I mentioned the relevant articles of the Law of the Sea Convention in relation to fisheries and so on, so to give you a bit of an introduction to the main instruments. And maybe, we cannot see, no, not at all. Wait a second. No. No, it doesn't work. No. No. So in this slide, what I wanted to show you and highlight was that the international legal framework is nowadays quite fragmented, like in many sectors of international law. I'm sure that you have already discussed a bit the issue of fragmentation within in these 2 days. And the main issue is, again, that you have many instruments which apply at the same time and many different institutions which are competent for little pieces of the framework. And this includes, of course, the regional fisheries management organizations. So each of these institutions has an international organization which takes decisions which are binding for states, okay? And to that, you have to, all that overlaps with the Convention on Biological Diversity, with other agreements concerning the protection of the environment, and eventually agreements also on the protection of human rights to a certain extent, which we can discuss in a moment. As I mentioned, fisheries until now, until the late 20th century, the focus was very much on the environmental dimension and the extractive economic dimension. And it's, of course, when we discussed about sustainable development and about sustainable governance of the oceans, that also the social dimension started to really have some traction. So when the Law of the Sea Convention was drafted in the 70s and adopted in the 80s, you do not really find any direct reference to the social dimension of fisheries. There is one article which very briefly mentions local communities and other entities that can be involved in fishing, but there is no provision actually regulating or protecting the cultural rights or the economic rights of those local communities. When sustainable development has become one of the priorities of one of the main points of discussion, let's say, more than the priority, one of the main points of discussion at the international level, and in particular at the UN level, of course, the social dimension started to slowly, enter into the discussion, also in relation to fisheries and other sectors of activities in the maritime environment, like shipping. But as of now, the concept is still not really integrated, let's say, in the fishing regulatory framework. One of the main reasons being that the fishing regulatory framework, as I showed up with the maps, has developed over the decades a bit separated from the rest, with its own logics, its own organizations, and its own instruments. And some of those organizations are highly criticized, also because they have become sort of closed clubs. It is very difficult for new states to participate in the fishing activities. It is very difficult to push different agendas which are not linked to the fishing activity within those organizations. And you can imagine that the social dimension is not exactly their priority. There is also another point that I wanted to raise, and I hope once you will have a look at the slides, that will become clearer, but otherwise we can discuss that in the Q&A also. One of the main limits also to the integration of the social dimension in the fisheries sector is the issue of the jurisdiction of the flag state. Do you know what the jurisdiction of the flag state? Yes, no, some different. Okay. So at sea, the vessel is considered as a unit. And you can imagine that we have very composite crews. You have the captain, which is of one nationality. You have the members of the crew, which are often of many different nationalities. The ship owner is one other maybe nationality. You have maybe another company which is renting the boat for the specific. So you have a sort of patchwork of states which all have some jurisdictional link to the vessel. In order to, let's say, ease the legal framework and to make it easier to apply, the vessel is considered traditionally as a unit. So it doesn't really matter the nationality of the crew members or the nationality of the company, even of the owner. But what matters is the nationality of the state, the state which has registered the vessel, and that's the flag state. On the basis of that registration, the vessel can perform a series of activities, including fishing. Okay? The problem is that flag states are, of course, not all as sensitive to certain issues, be it environmental or social. Some of them are considered flags of convenience. so they do not actually exercise any real control on what is happening on the vessel. So there is no, let's say, there is an obstacle to the development of more comprehensive and uniform legal frameworks, which both for environment and for the social rights and dimension of maritime activities. The second obstacle is the fact that most of the fishing happens far away from the coasts. So it is difficult for many states around the world to enforce any type of regulation, be it social or environmental. They maybe know of something which has happened, but by the time they arrive, or by the time they manage to get some information, it's already too late. The vessel has left the area of competence and the state cannot do anything anymore. Some states have also real difficulties in even performing enforcement within their own territorial sea. Think about the many island states in the Pacific or in the Atlantic, which have limited means, limited fleets, just maybe 2 or 3 Coast Guard vessels, and they have heavy fishery activities in their maritime zones. They cannot control everything that happens. Even if they know that conditions are awful on the vessel, that there is some pollution in another point, they just have difficulties in exercising that control. So those are the two main obstacles for the development of the legal framework, but also for the enforcement of eventually rules which are developed by the legal framework. And the concept of sustainable development, which has been, and I come to an end because sorry for the phone, I forgot my watch. The concept of sustainable development is now pervasive also in the narrative of fisheries. So we talk more and more about sustainable fisheries, on how to have sustainable ocean governance and so on. Most of the focus is on the environmental side, but even the environmental side has difficulty in breaking in. And because the sustainable development concept is still very much interpreted for its economic dimension in the maritime field, in the maritime sectors. So if we look also at, and I have put here the text of SDG 14, the Sustainable Development Goals, the 14 is dedicated to life below water. And even the phrasing of that concept, you see how the mentality or the approach towards the oceans have not completely changed. Because even there, it's about conserve and sustainably use. The second word is use. So we need to conserve, but to use and for the sustainable development. So it's used for development, which still very much highlights the economic dimension which prevails in the narrative and in the way in which we perceive the exploitation of the resources of the sea, with then creating a series of obstacles and barriers in the development of either the environmental dimension or of the social dimension. The SDG 14, however, mentions the health of the oceans. And then, of course, we can discuss maybe in the Q&A, what does that mean? What is the health of the ocean? Is it the health of the environment per se, or is it a healthy environment so that we can use it? So is the health of the environment connected to how much it can be used by us? Which is, of course, the, let's say, prevailing approach at the moment, even within UN fora. If some of you are interested, this is the decade of restoration. It's the UN restoration decade. But if you go on the website of the UN restoration decade, you see the definition of restoration, and it's still, oh yes, we need to make sure that the ecosystems are protected. The ecosystem services are also protected in order to use them, to exploit them. So that is still the narrative, that is still the approach. And you can imagine that this causes a series of issues then when you try to integrate all the concerns, be it the environmental ones or the social ones. So I think I used my 15 minutes. And thank you very much, and I hope to discuss further.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Celine, for this very clear framework of the main issues concerning law of fisheries. Yes, we still have a sort of anthropocentric vision, notwithstanding what I have told before about the pandemic and what it tried to show us. We still believe that everything is in our use and without any problem, any form of control. And the lack of control is another important point you mentioned, the difficulties in controlling the respect of national and international rules concerning fisheries. This is another, may I say, historic problem, because it's something very, very old. And concerning the social dimension, I told before that in particular the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea in a certain way made historic rights disappear, but up to a certain extent, because we still have the possibility, and it has been confirmed by the arbitral decision 2016 among Philippines and China, that there are special rights, historic rights, which do not belong to states but to communities, which is a different concept. But on this issue of social issues concerning fisheries, it is now important to listen to Mariana Toussaint. Mariana Toussaint, she works at FAO in Rome, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. And she, in particular, devoted her activities and studies on this issue. She has got a PhD in social sustainability, a master's degree in international trade, and a bachelor's degree in commerce before working for FAO. She is part of the FAO Globefish team, and maybe she will explain to us what is the area of activities in particular which Globefish team makes in the framework of the organization. So thank you very much for being with us and giving us this important voice, which is the voice of Mariana, of course, first of all, but is the voice in general terms of this organization, is important and very old organization, international organization, which is devoted to the activities and the attempt to in a certain way solve agriculture and also feeding problems of the world. Mariana, the floor is yours for 20 minutes.
Okay. So yes, they are going to put my presentation. So thank you. Well, thank you first of all for inviting FAO to give this presentation, and for the professors and experts here, and for students for attending this summer school, which I'm sure that it's been quite interesting for you. So as Ron said, I'm Mariana, I work in FAO, and my background is in international trade, but also in social sustainability. Well, the Globefish, before getting into the presentation and all these social sustainability in the fisheries and aquaculture sector, the Globefish, this is more like into international trade. So the Globefish team is a multi-donor funded project that we basically analyze information regarding fish trends, like market access. We support governments, but also the industry. So now moving into the presentation, I would like to, we've heard the word sustainability and social sustainability and all this, no? But I think it's important to mention that sustainability is not to exploit our resources, natural resources, in order to keep exploiting them. Actually, sustainability is to keep the natural resources for future also generations, because what we do, like, since we are in this earth, we take advantage, let's say, take advantage to our resources, but without any sustainable management. So that's the important thing. Sustainability is to keep our natural resources for future generations, but in a sustainable and responsible way. So yes, and when we talk about sustainability, we sometimes forget about the social dimension. No? So in order to have like a whole or like a fully sustainable practices, we need to take into consideration the environmental, the economic, and the social dimension. They should be balanced. So it's not more important the environmental or the economic or the social, because in order to get full sustainability, this is something that we have to keep in mind. And this is why I'm going to start explaining why the economic side is important also for the social dimension of the sustainability. So in this slide, we can see that fish is one of the most traded food commodity worldwide. This means that fisheries and aquaculture products represent around 56% of the total value of animal protein. So the sector contributes to national economic dimension, but also international trade. Not only that, this has a consequence that the sector contributes to employment, okay? And for local and small island developing states, the fisheries and aquaculture sector is one of the most important sectors in order to develop their activities, which also can have an impact in other sectors, such as, for example, local agricultural markets. So beyond the fact that fisheries and aquaculture products are purely international products that contribute to national and international economies, it also contributes to employment, where millions of people depend on the employment as a source of income, livelihood, and also part of their daily basis. So more specifically, in 2018, more than 59 people were engaged in the first part of the fish value chain, which makes the sector one of the main sectors that employ people worldwide. So yes, mainly in many countries, in particular in developing countries, there are people in vulnerable conditions, or in maybe also in extreme situations where they cannot, they don't have a voice. So these people, we're talking about the first part of the value chain. So these people are mainly, the groups of people are the artisanal or small scale fisheries, fish workers, and also migrant workers that are on board. No? And not only that, but the role of women in fisheries is diminished and is not visible, and is not it's not very well taken into consideration. However, I mean, despite the women represents half of the workforce in the fisheries sector. Right. Okay, here, I mean, here we cannot see, but in this slide, so just finalizing this is the economic part that this is why we have to have it balanced. No, the economic side is very important in order to give and provide very decent working conditions and fair conditions to everyone involved in the fisheries and aquaculture sector. So here, this slide was supposed to have like a news about situations where fish workers, women, and very bad situations are happening all over the world. And not only there were like in other parts of the world, not because sometimes we tend to think that these situations happen in developing countries or in poor low-income countries, but that's not true. I mean, these situations happen in developing countries, but also in developed countries. So here also I wanted to explain like what are the main social problems in the fisheries and aquaculture sector, where human and labor rights remain as the biggest challenge in the sector, where the protection of human and of these rights, human and labor rights, are weak and limited, and sometimes there is a lack of the implementation of these rights. Unsustainable and disrespectful practices may lead to social problems in the sector at different stages of the fish value chain. These situations can be, for example, IUU fishing, that is illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing, modern slavery, bondage, child labor, and any other sort of abuses along the fish value chain. But mainly these situations happen to vulnerable people, mainly migrant workers, children, and women. Not only that, other type of social problems in the sector is the lack of social protection, social security, healthcare services, but also the informality of the sector is a big problem, indecent working conditions at the workspace, but even other external aspects can trigger social problems, like, for example, the environmental ones, that climate change and biodiversity are also a big problem in the sector, which this affects especially to local and coastal communities. And nowadays, currently, we are facing the implications of COVID-19 and the current situation of the crisis between Russia and Ukraine, that the sector has been affected by all these situations, which has contributed this to the existing challenges in the human and labor rights applicability in the fish value chain. Also, the new hazard and the movement or reallocation of people from one country to another has contributed to the loss of their jobs, low incomes, or the situations that are very, very sad. Also, the disruption to trade have driven to reduce incomes and endangered livelihoods for many fish workers, especially with the most marginalized and vulnerable people in developing countries. So now you've been wondering, like, so what is FAO doing, or why the UN organization exists? No, that's something that people wonder all the time. So for FAO, social issues is not a new topic, as FAO promotes decent work and social responsibility. FAO has developed different instruments in the fisheries and aquaculture sector in order to address social problems in the sector. For example, we have the PSMA, the Agreement on Port State Measures, that addresses IUU fishing practices, the catch documentation scheme, the global record, the voluntary guidelines for small-scale fisheries, and of course, the Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries. The Code of Conduct is this was endorsed by FAO members in 1995. So the code was a very revolutionary and sophisticated instrument to everyone and available to everyone. So because it also has many articles addressing social and better working conditions for people involved in the fisheries and aquaculture sector. So all these instruments has helped governments to implement them in their national legislations, but also to other actors or other key actors in the fisheries and aquaculture sector, that they set sometimes the basis to develop other type of instruments. Also, in other sectors, FAO, together with OECD, has developed the guidance for responsible agricultural supply chain, which also addresses social issues. I think it was mentioned by Ron. which also addresses social issues, but in that sector. So we can see that FAO has developed many sectors, but nothing focused on fisheries along the fish value chain. So FAO has in 2016, during the FAO Subcommittee on Fish Trade, we organized a side event on decent work in fisheries in order to raise awareness and give importance and voice to the people that are involved and they cannot make it. But this was a very key event, because the year after, in 2017, during the subcommittee, it was members included or welcomed for the first time the sustainability in the agenda for the first time. So this was in order to promote the protection and respect of the human and labor rights in the sector. In 2018, during the Committee on Fisheries, FAO members, let me just explain that the FAO Committee on Fisheries is the world's largest forum to discuss policy issues related to fisheries and aquaculture matters. So in that year, in 2018, FAO requested the development of a guidance an FAO guidance on social responsibility in the fisheries and aquaculture value chains in order to ensure decent working conditions. So in 2019, during the subcommittee, FAO presented a draft guidance to members. And later on, I'm going to explain the process and how FAO developed that draft guidance for you to understand all this process. But so in that subcommittee, we received a pushback from members because they wanted to understand, or they wanted to know, they wanted to have more clarity about the topic, although it's a bit weird because it was requested by them, but then we received that pushback. And also they wanted to be consulted during this whole process. So last week we had the subcommittee on fish trade. So we presented the document. We explained the main problems in the fisheries and aquaculture sector, the social problems, the key stakeholders, other ongoing work worldwide, and the existing international instruments. And members agreed on the importance of this topic and encouraged FAO to continue the development of this guidance. So not only that, but in addition to that, in the last Committee on Fisheries in 2021, members endorsed the Declaration for Sustainable Fisheries and Aquaculture, where there's a paragraph focusing specifically on safety, in safe, healthy, and fair working conditions for all involved in the fish value chain. So we can see that international organizations and this FAO is doing more to ensure and to improve these conditions. So going back on the draft, what was the process and how we got that final document? Well, FAO in 2019, FAO organized several multi-stakeholder consultations worldwide, where in order to identify the gaps and the needs that the sector faces, what are the main problems with different realities, because in one country is not the same that the other one, so each country has different realities. So representatives from the industry, governments, NGOs, trade unions, among other, participated during these consultations. Also, FAO enabled a published online consultation where a first draft was shared with everybody, and then they could comment or add or receive suggestions from them. And this was to reach more people that were not able to join these regional consultations. So with the outcomes of those consultations, we were able to produce a draft guidance that was submitted in 2019 at the subcommittee. and it's when members requested to provide more clarity and to be consulted. So therefore, in last year, from June to August, we organized informal regional consultations with members where almost 150 representatives and experts nominated by countries participated. And it was interesting because we invite not only the fisheries the fisheries department of the governments, but also the labor, in order to understand what is happening between the communication or what is needed to get those connections, not only the fisheries, but also the labor side. Okay. So with all this process, we've been in close collaboration with other UN agencies, such as the International Labour Organization, the International Maritime Organization, UNCTAD, and OECD. So the FAO guidance that was agreed during the last subcommittee, it is that the FAO guidance should be voluntary, non-binding, complementary, practical, written in a simple language, and should focus on labor rights, decent working conditions, and social protection. Also, and something very important is the FAO guidance should be based on existing international instruments and guidelines. So it's not a new standard, it's just compiling what is already there in order to facilitate the sector, the implementation of these numerous international conventions and standards. So it was proposed that the FAO guidance should be divided into 6 appendices in order to cover the entire value chain. So it would be small-scale fisheries, industrial fishing, aquaculture production, processing, distribution, and retailing. And another thing that is very important is that each appendix should take into consideration cross-cutting aspects, such as child labor, women equity and equality, and fair integration of migrant workers. And just to finalize, it's true that fisheries is focused on the SDG 14, that is water, life below water, but the FAO guidance will also contribute to the achievement to other relevant SDGs that we can see on this slide. We have in particular the SDG 8, that is decent working conditions, SDG 5, that is gender equality, and others that are also relevant to the SDGs. So with that, I would like to thank you for all your attention, and here you have my contact details. So if you have any question, I'll be happy to.
Thank you very much, Mariana. It has been very interesting to have this information about, in particular, what has been done in the framework of your organization. It is really very, very important to know the percentages. For example, I was shocked in reading that 85% of the people engaged in fishing concerning work rate comes from Asia. 85%. So it is a huge majority respect of what happens in other regions, and also it's something that I already knew but it is important that you mentioned it. Problems concerning social responsibility and sometimes also legal responsibility, because there is the difficulties very often to implement social laws, working regulations in situations like the one that Celine before described, that is a crew composed by many nationality, the ship owner which belongs to another state, and so on. And sometimes it is very difficult to make all these rules work correctly, and there is also some problems because there is always someone who tries how can I say, to hide the responsibilities in dealing with all these, and so who suffers is people engaged on board, the members and so on. And also in the how can I say, it is very meaningful in the context of this specific summer school, having mentioned the code, the code on responsibility, because I think that FAO, if I'm not wrong, it was one of the first organizations who enacted a code of conduct. It was very important then to have this, of course, something which was very new for the time. Now we have many code of conducts, as we know, but you mentioned of course, the progress all over the years. We are still waiting, but not only from FAO, of course, but we are still waiting a proliferation of binding norms in this concerning this issue. But we will see what will happen. Now, we have the pleasure now to give the floor to Corrado Quinto, who is online. Corrado Quinto is the principal technical advisor on justice and human rights at UNDP, United Nations Development Program in Tunisia. Before joining UNDP, he founded the Coordinated Osservatorio, which is a research center for civilian victims of war. And he previously worked as country director for an NGO, the International Committee for the Development of Peoples, for the Italian Red Cross, for the Italian Center for Transnational Justice. What is very interesting is also that today he will develop his intervention concerning human rights in the fisheries, in the particular context of the south of Tunisia, Medellin region, which is a region which is a coastal region of Tunisia, but in the south, not how can I say, in front of Sicily, but on the southern part of Tunisia. So it is very interesting because it's a sort of case study, if I'm not wrong, but Corrado will tell us in a moment. So he is a lawyer, but with a very deep experience in all these areas, developing areas, because he also had the task of working in Argentina, Mauritania, Mali, Niger, Western Sahara, and Democratic Republic of. So thank you very much for being here, and even if online, but anyway, we hope that you will be here in presence in a future occasion, because we want to show you the Procida seat of our university, and the floor is yours.
Many thanks, Giuseppe. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
So thanks again for the organizer to invite UNDP to the summer school, and thanks Professor Cataldi to moderate brilliantly this panel that is honestly very interesting. So far I learned a lot from the initial two presentations, and we'll also like to thank participants, those who are there with you in the conference room. If I'm not wrong, you are 29 or 30 persons there, in addition to those who are online. I hope there is no technical issues and everybody can follow me. I will, as you said, I will talk more about a practical experience. So what we have done in Tunisia last year and what we are still doing here in Tunisia, thanks to two different projects. So if you allow me to do it, I will share my screen with you. I have a PowerPoint presentation. Can you see it?
Yes.
Perfect. I'm not alone in that. I mean, I have two partners in crime. So one of them is online, Hela Buddha, our justice expert, and the other one is there with you, Takwa Tayari, who is our business human rights administrator. And she was basically the motor of this project last year. So she might be able to jump into the discussion and provide additional details whether I missed something. And if you want to take advantage of her presence there in Procida, please continue to ask her questions even after the panel. So we started basically 2 years ago. It was a project that we implemented thanks to funding received by the Rule of Law Global Program from New York. But before talking about the project, let's share with you a couple of elements on the context where we operate, Tunisia. So, you know, there is more than 10 years that we after the revolution in Tunisia, the 2011 revolution, where you have to just bear in mind three key words: employment, freedom, and dignity. And these three words you will see wherever we work in these different projects we implement. We try to focus on the value that is behind the revolution and then the intent from the population at that time. Since the revolution, Tunisia has ratified basically all the human rights treaties and conventions. So in terms of legislation, from a national point of view, there's not so much to do. Then we have the 2014 constitution. That is also a rich document that emphasizes the rights and the obligations, not only for the states and citizens, but also for the business sector. Unfortunately, last year, we noticed that an important institutional challenge took place here in Tunisia. So we have now the new constitution. Basically, the constitution has been suspended because many different measures have been taken by the President of the Republic, including the suspension of the parliament and then also the Judicial Council. So now we are in a very delicate period. We are approaching to a new referendum to see whether a new constitution is needed or not. So far, business activities are regulated through the commerce and investment law. So there are not so many other rules and regulations and laws about business and the conduct of business here in Tunisia. I can tell you that there is no national action plan on business human rights. There is not even a discussion on that, but let's say that we are preparing the ground for that. Let's talk now about what we did. On the left side of the slide, you can see a couple of basic elements on the project that we implemented. Honestly, it's not really projects. So for those who are not familiar with the UN jargon, this is an initiation plan. So it's like an assessment. Basically, we try to analyze the context, listen to what people say in order to be able to really propose something to the government that makes sense and that can be implemented in the next years. So we did an initiation plan of 18 months, and then we work basically on three main points. One is one sector, so we identify the fishery value chain. The second is one region, and we work in Medellin. And the third one is the objective. So the general goal of this intervention was to motivate stakeholders to engage in business human rights process on the midterm. Why we selected the fishery value chain and why Medellin? Medellin is a region that we know pretty well. We worked there since 2015 with a number of variety of projects, including the one that I manage with my team on human rights and justice. So when you know basically all the actors on the field, then you can introduce something new, because business human rights is something new here in Tunisia. So we realized that it was possible to talk about business human rights, to sensitize the corporations to work on the promotion of human rights only if you have a couple of doors that are already open, basically. And in Medellin, that was the case. And the fishery value chain was the most important one, not just for the economy of the country, but also for a social dimension. Especially in Medellin, there are so many communities and individuals working in the fishery value chain that basically whatever you do in the fishery value chain has an impact on their conditions in terms of socioeconomic conditions. So working in the fishery value chains was an added value because it could allow us to understand exactly which kind of possible human rights violation you can identify working with a single fisherman that is working with his 5 meters boat, and then with a big company that exports tuna fish, the red tuna fish, to Japan for sushi. And in the middle of this chain, you have restaurants, you have hotels, you have the different units that transform fish, etc., and transport, etc. So it was a very complete analysis about possible human rights violations. The real key entry points for us was a bottom-up approach. So how to work on business human rights in a country that doesn't talk about business human rights. We also observed the different approaches used by UNDP and other agencies working on business human rights in the world, and we realized that most of them start talking about business human rights with the central government and the central branches of the government, and then as soon as the discourse is more mature, then they go into the field and trying to, let's say, delocalize the discussion. We decided to do exactly the opposite. So start working to those who know exactly what we are doing, what we are able to do in the field in order to create this kind of trustship relationship, and then put together all these actors in order to create a dialogue on a local level, and then see how it was possible to get the interest of the central government. So that was exactly what we were able to do. So analyze the dynamics of the value chain in Medellin, trying to understand exactly which were the expectations of the local actors in terms of promotion of human rights in the fishery value chain. And then it was basically pretty easy to get the attention of the other actors. That was civil society organizations, private sector, governmental bodies on the local level, academia as well. So it was, I mean, a slow process, but honestly very, very useful. Please bear in mind that we started this process during the pandemic. So at the beginning, it was not so easy to implement all the activities. We have been able to organize, I mean, a different kind of activities in terms of capacity buildings for workers, civil society organizations, and also researchers. And that was also possible through different dissemination campaigns and information campaigns. And we were able to create like a kind of community, a business human rights community at the local level. And now we can also say that this local level community is also expanding on a national level. We have been able to deepen our analysis of the fishery value chain thanks to the voice of the different beneficiaries, that those who really participated in the field missions that we organized last year. We have been able to conduct survey, we have been able to conduct bilateral meetings with all of them, and also focus group with most of the stakeholders. It was important to let them know since the beginning that we were just analyzing the situation. We wanted to listen to their major challenges and expectations, but we didn't want to promise something because it was not a project. It was, again, an initiation plan. So we wanted to listen then take all the information and propose something. And we are now in this second phase. So thanks to what we learned, we are now able to suggest something that could be transformed into a project. Let's say this kind of consultation was also with other international and national organizations, including the UN family, more specifically FAO, since we are talking about fishery, and then ILO, since we are talking about also decent working conditions. And then since we talk about human rights, for sure, also the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. So the consultation with the other UN agencies allow us to basically create this kind of synergy among us, and then to create a better enabling environment for an implementation of a possible future long-term project on business human rights. Here you have two different kind of, let's say, challenges. On the left, you have the global fisheries value chain. I don't want to go into details because you know all of that, but let's see together. So you have major problems related to forced labor, slavery and human trafficking, abusive living and working conditions, illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing, weak or ineffective legislation and regulation, and then you have also increasing commercial exploitation and the rights of the coastal communities. And this is basically valid all over the globe. Then you have, on the other side, more context-related challenges, so related to Tunisia. You have few challenges related to the rule of law and governance regulations, lack of transparencies in terms of lack of information sometimes on how private companies work and should work in Tunisia. We have few problems in terms of law enforcement, fraud, corruption, tax evasion, and many others as well. There is not so much compliance of the national legislations on the administrative acts with human rights standards. There is something to do on that. We are trying to identify what is possible to do with the government in order to increase the compliance. Lack of transparency also in the business transaction as well. The political commitment is not so strong. And then you have incomplete enjoyment of human rights in the workplace. This is something that we were expecting, but honestly, we had a better idea now once we received the final results of a survey that we did on the field, and we will look at a few results in a couple of seconds. The last point, not the last one, before the last one, the challenges to access to remedy. So this is, as you know, the third pillar of the business human rights principles, access to remedy. And that was our entry point, because in Medellin we worked, before starting the business human rights project, we worked with justice and penitentiary institutions. So as you see, there is like a contradiction. So we work in the places of deprivation of liberty, like prisons, and then suddenly we work in the sea, so in a very open space. But then we realize that human rights violations are for sure different, but concern the life of the different person that we talk to. It was very interesting to see how, at the beginning of our experience in the field with our bilateral meetings with beneficiaries, when we clearly asked them, do you see here the title of the project? We talk about business and human rights. Which is your first reaction when we talk about business human rights? And then they start talking about what is business, what is human rights, and then as soon as the conversation go further, they make the link about how business could impact business human rights and vice versa as well. And then the common answer to basically this kind of questions about human rights, it was the fact that they wanted to have a better environment where to operate, so where human rights are respected, in order to have a life in dignity. So dignity for them, it was the main element to be preserved thanks to a promotion of human rights in business. And that was something that we really bear in mind with our colleagues when we do our field missions because again, we can write a project, we can copy paste whatever we find on the amazing literature on business human rights, but at the end of the day, a project can work only if you listen to the voice of people that are, at the end, those who will implement the project with you and that will take benefits of the results of the different projects. So we are trying to incorporate in our analysis the opinion of the different beneficiaries. These are a couple of results of the survey that we did in Medellin. 20.5% have regular income. 64% have no contracts. 48% have no social protection. 44% have no idea about human rights. The majority has never heard of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The majority considers that working conditions are not decent, no fair income, no safety or security, no equal treatment, ineffective freedom of expression. So the list is not exhaustive, but you can see here a couple of major examples. There is very limited respect for consumers' rights, unexisting respect of their environment and sustainability. I'm talking about a region where environment is crucial for the socio-economic, let's say, life in Tunisia. And then limited trust in national authorities. So now we have to see how we can address all these points coming from the survey and transform into action in our future project in order to try to find solutions to all these kind of problems mentioned by the survey. We published a couple of reports. The most important one during the inception phase were these two reports that you can see, an analysis of the implementation of business and human rights in the fisheries value chain of Tunisia, best practices, lessons learned, and the way forward. And then the intégration progressive des droits humains. I will try to translate in English. So it's a progressive integration of human rights in the fishery value chain. This is basically a simplified guide that should be used by all the actors working in the fishery value chain, where they will find their simple answers to practical questions about how the fishery value chains work, their rights, obligations, best practices, and so on. So we are now trying to simplify this guide in order to be used by the majority of the population. We initiated also an important step forward is a national dialogue, a multi-stakeholder national dialogue on business human rights in Tunisia that was in December last year, where we had the participation of government, business, unions, individuals, different civil society organizations, both national and internationals, and academia. And then we have been able to also to facilitate the participation for the first time ever of Tunisia at the United Nations Forum on Business Human Rights in 2021. That was the first time that Tunisia attended this event, and it was a good occasion for the Ministry of Fishery and Agriculture to showcase the experience that we were conducted in Tunisia, and it was really much appreciated. The same time last year, the United Nations Dialogue Program Global Rule of Law annual report mentioned Tunisia as a unique experience in implementing the business human rights principles. So again, Tunisia last year was really at the center of the attention on business human rights, and this is also one of the reasons we have been selected by another project that we are implementing now, funded by the Japanese government together with other 17 countries all over the world, introducing the concept of human rights due diligence for local and international business. Again, just to finalize my intervention, a couple of considerations about the importance of business human rights here in Tunisia with this new project that we are starting now is The first one is with companies and the second one with the government. So the first part of our intervention is focusing on strengthening the responsible business conduct by supporting companies in carry out the human rights due diligence, and then providing guidance to companies interested in conducting human rights impact assessments. And last, also guiding companies in ensuring their post-pandemic economic recovery respect human rights standards. We are trying to see how it's possible to facilitate the introduction of human rights due diligence in a post-pandemic setting. That is not exactly the easiest thing to do, but is absolutely the only thing to do right now, especially if we consider the fact that the legislation in the European countries about human rights due diligence is progressing very quickly. And Tunisian companies are in close commercial relationship with Italian, French, and other European companies. So they might be very soon obliged to be in line with the human rights due diligence processes that are all over the world, and especially in Europe. So we are trying to anticipate as much as possible this step by promoting this new culture here in Tunisia. With the government, we are working mainly with the presidents of the governments, and then also we are working with the Chamber of Commerce, advocating for the adoption by the state of a national plan. Again, we are just at the beginning. We are not pushing for that because, again, it's a very delicate period now for Tunisia, but it's the beginning of something that can be developed in the future. We provide technical assistance to develop baseline assessments in order to determine the most salient human rights challenges caused by operations and companies. The list is very long, so for sure we have to prioritize those violations that could be more useful for the government now. And then last but not least, Tunisia will hold now at the end of August the TICAD 8, so it's an international conference on Africa, on business in Africa, promoted by Japan. So we will facilitate peer learning opportunities among states, including their presence at the regional and global forums on business human rights, like the Africa forums and the TICAD 8 as well. So I think I'm done with the time I have. So I hope it was clear. And again, if you need further assistance, do not hesitate to take advantage of the presence of TACWA there.
Thank you very much, Corrado. Your testimony, I think it is very, very important and useful for us because it goes beyond the realm of fisheries, because when you were talking, I was thinking of an experience I had once in a bilateral commission, Italian-Tunisian commission, concerning fisheries in the Sicilian Channel, the problem of Mamelone and so on. You know very well, I guess, what I'm speaking of. And I learned that it was very difficult because it's very tricky and sensitive to try to put on the table concrete, specific issues when the two parts are developed countries and the developing countries. Because the developing country always has an attitude, may I say, something which is not clear, but it is under the table. We are poor, you are the rich one, you have to pay, we are right, you are wrong. This is, in general terms, the attitude sometimes. And so, and it is very dangerous to try to act in a different way, because it is always the danger of being accused of trying to make a sort of neo-colonialism. And so it is very, very difficult. So when it is an international organization, when it is an entity which belongs to the United Nations, it is very different, because you speak not in the name of developed, a rich and industrialized country. You speak in the name of an international organization. And so the point you make is a point which in principle has already been shared by a huge community of states and cultures. So the cultural problem is no more a problem, may I say, when it is a united. Why I'm saying so? Why I'm speaking of this? Because it is very important to have international organizations acting with all the possibilities they could have. The problem is that we are living in a historical moment, a very sad historical moment, where the multilateralism is in crisis, where the bilateral contacts, bilateral negotiations among states are the preferred one in this moment, because there is a sort of how can I say, of fear and always a political situation that makes multilateralism not work as it should be. So you have a very difficult, but you have a very important task. And so it is very important that you told us of this experience you are making, you are trying to develop in Tunisia with Tunisian, of course, stakeholders and authorities, trying to convince them that speaking of business and human rights is not something which tries to export a sort of cultural developed countries paradigm, but it is something which could be shared by all of us without putting on it hats of a particular part of the world. Okay, so thank you very much. Now, I have the pleasure to give the floor to Michele Scardi. Michele Scardi is a biologist, so we change our point of view in this moment once again, and I think this is the interesting aspect of this roundtable. He's a full professor of ecology at the University of Rome, Tor Vergata. He's a former researcher at Biological Oceanographic Laboratory of the Stazione Zoologica Anton Dohrn in Naples. You have to know that we in Naples, we have a very important, a very ancient zoological research entity, which is the Anton Dohrn. But maybe on this, Michele Scardi, maybe we'll give a moment of your time, please, to explain what, because we are particularly proud of having Anton Dohrn entity in Napoli. And so he has taught and has in particular developed his scientific interests in ecology. He's the founder of the International Society for Ecological Informatics and the author of about 200 scientific papers and book chapters concerning these issues. So, in particular, he takes care of data analysis techniques in ecology, zoology, and oceanography. So it is particularly important and interesting for us to have also this voice from a scientist in this roundtable. So, Michele, please come here. The floor is yours for the next 15 minutes.
Dobbiamo solo mandare una presentazione, perché se no altrimenti le animazioni non vanno. Ok. Perfetto. Okay, so thank you for the opportunity to be here today. And as the chair and asked, I will tell you something about the Stazione Zoologica Anton Dohrn in Naples. This is the most important marine institution in Italy, and it has been the most important for many years. And it was built in the 1854 by Anton Dohrn, that was a German. It was not a biologist. It was just someone who cared about the marine research. And it was one of the first people to care about marine research. He got funds for other people in Germany, and the institution was built around the half of the 18th century. And it was the first aquarium open to the public in the Mediterranean. And one among the 2 or 3 oldest institutions in Europe. So it's a very important institution. It's a place where Nobel Prizes were used to meet, and you could really breathe the science under that roof. And I'm really proud to be to have been a young scientist there. But now about my point of view on fisheries and sustainability, I want to start from what people was used to think in the 18th century and in the 19th century. Thomas Huxley, the so-called Darwin's bulldog, because he was one of the strongest supporters of the evolutionary theory of Darwin, he told, and he was maintained in public debates, that marine resources were unlimited. So you could take whatever you want, and there would be always as much fish as you want, and no problem at all in managing that resource. But this was not really true, and people knew about that, because even in the Middle Age, in some region, it was forbidden to fish some kind of shellfish using trawling devices. And in some places, there was a death penalty for that kind of fishery. So the fact that you can deplete a resource was already known. Now the situation is really different, because someone think that we have enough food from the sea, others think that we don't have enough food, that we are running out of fish in the next few years. Obviously, the situation is somewhere in the middle, because some population, some stocks, some fish stocks, so population that are exploited by the same fishery using similar methods in general in a given geographic area, some stocks are safe, others are not safe. Others are really close to be no more exploitable. Fishery scientists developed a number of theories, another methods, another model about how we can exploit fisheries. This is a very simple, popular one. If you follow the catches, when you increase the effort, there is an optimum point from an economical point of view. The revenue is optimum somewhere. Then the catches are the maximum you can get in another level of effort. And if you go on and increase the effort, you end up to a point where the fishing activity are no more of economic interest, because you don't earn enough money to support the fishery. Of course, what happens is that the number of fish keep decreasing. However, this kind of model and other models that fishery biologists develop are usually about a single species. This is one of the main problems. Of course, there are models involving more than one species. But in general, management is focused on single species fisheries. And this ignores the fact that fish species compete with each other. For instance, anchovies and sardines in the Benguela Current in South Africa compete with each other. And you have some places and sometimes where one of the two species prevails over the other. So management is not only the only way to regulate population. Nature regulates population, and interaction regulates population. And if we ignore the fact that human activities often cause unpredictable effects, we can be very surprised by some facts. For instance, Umberto d'Ancona was a young zoologist in the first decades of the last century. And he was used to go to the market and record the kind of fish that were caught in the Adriatic Sea. And he noticed that during the World War I, there is the zoom bar over the World War I in the graph. But during the years of the war, the number of sharks caught by the fisheries increased to up to almost 40%. That was absolutely unbelievable because there were not so many sharks before. And after the war, as soon as the fisheries start fishing again, the number of sharks increased. Because sharks were just a proxy for the fishermen. Fishermen are sharks, and the real shark replaced the fishermen when the fishermen didn't fish because of the war. And this is also the reason why the father-in-law of Umberto d'Ancona, Vito Volterra, who is popular with Lotka and Volterra, as the two scientists developed a model for the interaction between predators and prey. So this was caused by this kind of observation. But before Umberto d'Ancona and before Vito Volterra, people knew that fish eat something, and what they use other fish, literally smaller fish, but not only that. In fact, they not only eat smaller fish, but basically at the basis of this trophic network, this network of interaction between species, there are small algae, microalgae. We cannot see them in the water, they are very small, but they are the main source of food for all the organisms that live in the sea. And solar energy is what microalgae use to produce new microalgae, and all the other organisms feed on macroalgae or feed on organisms that feed on macroalgae and so on. And if you go up to the top of this chain, you find fish or other animals that feed on many levels of consumers of that set of microalgae. And at each level, you lose some energy, because when you change the nature of the energy, you always lose something. Is the reason why the engine of your car heats up while the can is running, because not all the energy in the fuel can be converted into motion, okay? This is well known, and we know that we are able to obtain 1/1,000,000th of fish given the energy in the sunlight. But this is completely, perfectly renewable. So this is good news, because we know that the whole system is working. How much fish we can obtain? In order to have estimates, we have to look at the Earth from the satellites, and measure the ocean color. And the ocean color can tell us how many microalgae are in the ocean. And models can tell us how many microalgae can be produced every year. And this is a good way to estimate how much fish can be caught in any region of the planet. Usually, at global scale, we use the so-called large marine ecosystems, that are sub-regions of the oceans. Okay, and I just want to give you a rough figure. Out of 40 to 60 gigatons of carbon, a gigaton is 1 billion tons. And this is the amount of food our oceans produce every year for all the other organisms. But out of this overall production, about 85% is through microalgae that feed fish, that feed other fish, and so on. So we have some methods. I'm skipping something. We have some methods to predict how much fish we can catch. I'm saying how much, not which kind of which kind of fish we can collect, we can catch, because this is much more tricky. In order to make this prediction, we have to know where in that network of predator-prey relationship the fish we catch are. And the average level of the fish in the Mediterranean Sea, for instance, is 3.4. It's the level 3.4. It means somewhere that is a predator of an herbivore, more or less like this. And if we use this kind of information, we can exploit the capability of some models that can predict the amount of microalgae we have to use to keep the production of new fish sustainable. So to have 50% or 70% or 90% or whatever you want percent of probability to obtain the same amount the next year and the next year and so on. So we can predict this. And for the Italian GSA, that are the region used for statistical purposes for fisheries, the amount of fish is somewhere between 0.5 and 0.9 tons of wet weight per square kilometer per year. But it is the overall average. And of course, it depends on the way we exploit these resources. This is a potential. This is not what we actually obtain. This is a potential. What fishery put into a natural system is the usage of fuel, because using fuel to have our fishing boats go around and fish make the fishing boat a particular kind of predator. A natural predator cannot exist if they don't have enough food to eat within the range where they live. This is the reason why, there can be a limited number of lions, polar bears, and so on. But as long as you put some fuel in your fishing boat, you can go around wherever you want and keep catching fish, even when it is not sustainable from an ecological viewpoint. And so this is the reason why a very popular and absolutely sound theory is that we are changing the ecosystem, changing also the level of exploitation of the energy. A good news, no fish species except this one has been declared officially extinct during the last centuries. Other, maybe millions of years ago, were extinct. But these poor fish went extinct because it doesn't swim. It walks on the seafloor. So it is not a target for fishery activity. It's just unable to escape unfavorable conditions. So if there is pollution, it dies. And this really happened. This is not true if we think about large whales, baleen whales, large blue whale, and because they have been really endangered during the last decades. Now the situation is better, but when the population goes down and becomes smaller than a given threshold, they are extinct. So this is a real problem, but it's going to be solved. A couple of words about the Mediterranean and the way we regulate fisheries in Europe. In this picture, you can see some circles that show how many stocks are fish stocks, mean species, are exploited. How many are exploited but monitored, and how many light blue are in good shape. The intermediate blue almost in good shape. F means mortality because of fishery. SSB means the spawning stock biomass, how many fish are able to reproduce. And dark blue, the one that you can find in Mediterranean, means that we are not able to have a sustainable production. So this is the situation for almost all the fish stock in the Mediterranean. What happens in the Mediterranean? That more than 50% of the catches are by fisheries on the southern and eastern part of the basin. Of course, they fish, and there is an FAO agency, the General Commission, General Fishery Commission for the Mediterranean, that is able to enforce a policy about fishery, but it's very difficult to act on fishing boats, let's say, from Libya. How can you control them? It's not possible. This means that we are now facing, and this is my last slide, I guess. There was if I remember correctly, we're facing a problem. If we try to regulate European fisheries, and we do that, there is a common fishery policy in Europe, and there is a marine strategy framework directive to assess the ecological status of our seas that demand reduction of the effort, demand reduction of the areas that are fished. If we do that, and we have a goal that is about 30% of the area of the European seas that is not fished. But if we do that, what we attain is to move the effort elsewhere. We move the effort on the southern shore, where it is almost unregulated, or we move the effort and the impact of the fisheries in other regions of the planet, where it is absolutely unregulated, with all the social and economical issues. So the not in my backyard policy is something we should carefully consider. You know that we have a problem with natural gas, because Russian gas is not so easily available in the future. But we stopped drilling and extracting our gas because we didn't want to drill ours, because it makes noise, and noise is a damage for fish and for mammals and for other organisms. But now, what is the consequence? We have a big problem. Good news, we are not going to see this kind of situation. We are not going to fish the last fish in the ocean, but we should think carefully about how to manage fisheries in order to make them sustainable and sound from an ecological viewpoint. Thank you.
Thank you, Michele. It has been very, very interesting for us to listen to your presentation and to look at the slide because, you know, we, first of all, even we who are lawyers, we have to learn all these concepts. When I began to study the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, I had to face these distinctions, and I had to learn what is a bentonic, you know, environment, what is a demersal fish, what is a marine mammal, of course, and so on, because we need this concept. But what is very important is also this idea that you mentioned at the end, that there is a difficult balance, but that we have to take care of among the necessities of the economical necessities and also the necessity of differentiate sources of energy and of course environmental worries. So we correctly maybe made the choice not to drill under the sea, but the consequences, as you mentioned, are really worrying in this specific moment during this war. So it is very, very difficult to make these choices, and the problem is that there is no cooperation, the lack of cooperation. In 1994, when there was the first European Communities, that is then was regulation on the Mediterranean fisheries, I was in Crete at the diplomatic conference because the European Union tried to convince the states of the south of the Mediterranean to adopt the same regulation, because otherwise we only make a favor to our competitors. If the European Union limits itself, its fishermen, it only make a favor to the southern fishermen who can freely go when it is not permitted to go to European fishermen. But it was impossible for political reasons. And I had the task of making a report. And when I made this report saying, okay, try to make the Mediterranean Sea a sort of mare nostrum, a sea shared by all the coastal states of the Mediterranean Sea with the same rules, there was the Japanese delegate who intervened and said, okay, this is a very good intellectual exercise. Because why? Why? Because the Japanese were and are still interested in fishing on the high seas, and we have still corridors of high seas in the Mediterranean Sea where they can go and take the red tuna. So, so there are many political problems to solve. Okay. Now, last but not least in our panel, I have a special pleasure to introduce you, Rosa Federica Grassi. Why special pleasure? Because she was a former student of mine, but she's an entrepreneur. She holds a master in maritime law and economics from the University of Pescara, of course, but mainly she is responsible for international trade and quality control of L'Equipaggio SNC, an import-export frozen seafood product company, directly overseeing the quality and output of fish products in overseas operations in Europe, Peru, South Korea, China, Vietnam, India, and Australia. She is member of the board of directors and of technical scientific committee of the Italian National Association of Seafood Companies, Assoittica. So I think it is very, very important for us also to have the point of view of a person who has the special experience and competence from the point of view of stakeholders, of entrepreneurs in this very delicate issue we are discussing today. So, Federica, the floor is yours for 15 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Professor Cataldi. So good afternoon, everyone. It's not easy to speak about the fishery industry after an ecologist, but we try to see something of interesting. I belong to a family which is involved to the third generation of my family, which is involved in seafood trade. We are specialized in frozen seafood, but we deal also with some local catches. And I'm a member of the Assoitica's board of directors. We are a national association of seafood companies. Assoitica was founded in 1986. And it involves 120 companies for a total turnover of about 7 billion euro. And we have around 9,000 employees. The analysis of our sector corporate sustainability must start from some basic considerations of the current situation, which sees fish as one of the most traded food commodities worldwide. First of all, we have to underline that Europe is a net importer of fish. So it relies on third countries' catches and aquaculture raw materials. And this has a huge effect, a significant effect on the environmental and social sector. Secondly, according to the European Market Observatory for Fisheries and Aquaculture Products, EUMOFA, we consume around 45 in Europe, around 24 kilos per capita of fish annually, and in Italy it's around 31. Moreover, the consumption of fish proteins is rising constantly around the world, especially in outside Europe. In Italy, we import around 2/3 of the traded fish. This means that traceability, transparency and monitoring have to be controlled along the entire supply chain globally. Another crucial aspect we have to underline when we speak about our social responsibility is the company size, because according to the EU Commission, 99% of total European firms belong to small and medium-sized companies. Many of them, like mine, are family businesses. And this is a factor crucial for the capacity of our company in developing our own commitment to corporate sustainability. And even in the EU Commission, in its proposal of directive on corporate sustainability due diligence, has made a distinction based on company size. Indeed, it seems that these directive obligations will apply only to larger companies. So consequently, it's quite clear that our commitment to due diligence is a voluntary commitment based on our culture and awareness. Of course, in this part of the world, we are obliged by national and international laws to respect human rights and the environment and to protect, to promote decent working conditions. In addition, our country has an effective system of control and sanction regarding our company's misconduct. But the rising of a fish consumption and the growing world population represent a big challenge for sustainability from the economic, social, environmental point of view. From an economic point of view, we need to face growing demands of rising prices of seafood to ensure at the same time the correct balance of our companies. From an environmental perspective, we must guarantee the sustainable use of wild resources and the sustainable development of aquaculture in the perspective of protecting the environment for the benefit of future generations. As far as social aspects are concerned, we need to provide jobs and fair working conditions for millions of people who represent the primary income source for the family. We should also consider that according to FAO, nearly 60 million people were engaged in the primary sector in 2018, primary sector of fisheries and aquaculture. And to achieve this aim, the common fisheries policy applies not only to primary production, so catching and aquaculture, but also to the marketing of seafood products. And this policy is focused on sustainability and on the reduction of fishing efforts of our fleet. In its external dimension, the common fisheries policy ensures that imported products respect the same binding conditions of national productions to avoid that our market can become a space for unfair competition or for illegal catch marketing or for human rights abuses. To supply enough quantities of fish to the final consumer and to ensure the good quality of fish, this refers to sustainability, but we also need to focus our attention on the management of other challenges and threats of our sector. We are speaking about the increasing global consumption and increasing world population, but we have problem with the overfishing, with illegal fishing, climate change and consequent migrations and human rights respect. To limit the overfishing is essential to promote the responsible fish consumption by promoting the seasonality, the respecting of seasonality of catches, and also to involve the consumer to consume less appreciated species. But we have another huge problem in our sector because this is an unattractive sector for youth, which require personal consistent efforts that cannot be taken without a real interest in this job sector. Consequently, the future of our sector is uncertain. And without new workers, it is very difficult to go on. Indeed, despite the continuous development of technology, this is a sector that relies on human work. Human work is always essential for the functioning of the entire sector. And we also should consider that the crew of fishing vessels operating by foreigners and migrant workers are constantly growing. We need to improve the high sea fishery law in order to ensure the controls on board by an independent the third-party authority in order to stop cases of forced labor or the labor working without contracts. Crew welfare and environmental protection must be the pillars of all efforts to manage the IC resources. In addition to all this consideration, we need to underline that our value chain is a global value chain, is a complex value chain that, and this can provide some difficulties in identify risks related to the respect of the human rights and the environmental impacts of our companies. This chain is characterized by different steps, and from the farming or the catching to the sell to the final consumers, and it involves many stakeholders like commercial fishing vessels, farms, recreational fishing that is causing a big problem also from the ecological point of view. Auction, processor, distributors, fishmonger, and food services and restaurants. So it is important, essential to understand that all the stakeholders of the value chain are important, and the decision must be taken in order to get together, in order to guarantee fair trading conditions, fair working conditions for everybody. And as the representative from FAO said, a human rights approach helps vulnerable groups of the fisheries and aquaculture value chain, such as women, migrant workers, indigenous people, and small-scale fisheries. So we need to identify, prevent, and mitigate human rights abuses and environmental impact. And at the same time, we need to, we must foresee for remedial action. But this is not easy due to the complexity of this transboundary value chain, the costs, and also the difficulties in obtaining clear information and the pressure of the market dynamics, of course. So to sum up, we need to achieve a better performance of the fisheries and aquaculture value chain while securing labor rights and food security. We have another issue to consider, that consumers and investors are becoming more aware about companies' sustainability records, and this is crucial for unwanted reputational risks. I invite you to carefully look at this picture, because these are the top 10 global capture producers, and the source is FAO. You can see the biggest one is China. And nothing to say against China, but to speak about sustainability and human rights protection on fleets coming from China, we have to look at their national law as per the flag, the state flag law. As far as our voluntary commitments are concerned, I show you now which are our latest involvement of Assoitica. We are working on procedural guidelines in which social environmental aspects of due diligence are crucial for the development of our businesses. So the guidance is based on 3 pillars that target the development and the respect of food security and traceability, the respect of environment and ethics, especially from the point of view of the human rights respect. And we are working on a system which is in line with the existing international standards like ISO 8000. And this system will be applied under auditable independent third party verification. Another latest initiative we have taken is an agreement with the Italian Association of Styrofoam pack producers in order to reduce the waste of packaging and to recycle them. We have a memorandum of understanding with the Ministry of Health in order to promote the consumption of different species to not be too heavy on some species that are under threat. And we have also an agreement with the network of chef school in which we are teaching to use different species. For my own projects, I'd like to tell you that in 2017, I started to develop, before the Legge Salva Mare introduction, a project aimed at reducing the quantity of waste present in our seas by encouraging fishing vessels to not throw back the litter to the sea, but to bring them to the ports for recycling. Here, the authorities must organize, provide facilities to collect these wastes for the correct management of marine litter. And we are working also on a project to promote the training of fishermen and their families together, to put all together in the same classes in order to involve in this project more than one generation. Our wish is to let fishermen feel as the sea sentinels in order to obtaining their cooperation in the fishing for litter. And I also registered a trademark that is this one, Catch and Clean. Catch and Clean to identify the cooperating vessels involved in this project. And we use this, we will use this label also to identify catches coming from cooperating vessels in order to let the consumers know that consuming that kind of fish, they are contributing to the marine litter, to the achievement of a solution for the marine litter. Another project in which I'm involved is the survey on the role of women in the Italian seafood industry, with the focus on the post-primary production. And we had this, we were asked by FAO to investigate among our companies in order to to open the gender debate in our sector and to contribute to improvement of working women's working conditions and having more women in the management of the seafood sector. sector. And another common activity I do in order to check on proper working condition and environmental protection, I regularly carry out inspections in as many other Italian companies do, on foreign fish supplier premises, in order to be sure that we are not buying from companies that can be involved in forced labor or child labor or human rights threat. And also to check the catches or origin in order to avoid to buy illegal fishing. And for my contribution to this sector, that is not exclusively focused on money, on financial aspects, but also on social, institutional, and environmental one. Last month, I received from the Italian Coast Guard the Artemide Award. I was honored to receive this award from our Coast Guard, and I dedicated this award to all women involved in the seafood sector, since I'm aware that we can make the difference and on the path of human rights protection and environmental protection. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Federica. I think it is wonderful to end this first part of our roundtable with your words about the contribution of women to this sector, and with this kiss among these two fishes. Thank you for having shared with us your experiences, your projects, and for having underlined new issues to put on the table. For example, the problem of young people not choosing this kind of work. We know that it is not the only case, the only sector where there is a sort of crisis among the new generations. I think we have to make an effort to try to make this work, how can I say, yes, attractive for young people. It is the task of teachers of university, but mainly of employees of firms, and why not also of national and international institutions. And another very important issue is the involvement of the consumer in all this, to make the consumer be aware, to understand, to know. It is very sad also in a city like Napoli, in a city where there is a coast, to see people at the market saying, what is this fish?
Yes.
We should have a sort of basic knowledge and trying to understand also what does it mean, aquaculture and open sea and so on. Anyway, I think it was really an important moment this afternoon to having had the voices of these people all engaged in different areas, but with this fil rouge of fisheries and sustainability. Now the floor is open. We have about 15 minutes for questions and answers. So please, you are welcome if you want to intervene, to make questions, to make comments, to say everything you want. There is already one. Yes. Yes, Celine. Celine with an S.
So my first question is from your perspective, the people at sea are protected under the international law of the sea beyond the provisions in the UN Convention.
No, the Baltic Sea Convention does not really protect the human element at sea.
They're just like about provision of transporting slaves.
Yes, so there are the human element is really present in it. So the Baltic Sea Convention, for those who are not very familiar with it, it's more than 300 articles, and it's this framework convention for the regime of the sea. And it is mainly to share the oceans in zones and to allow and to regulate the duties and obligations of states in the different maritime zones for the different uses. The human element was not really present during the negotiations for many historical reasons, the way in which law of the sea has evolved over the centuries and so on. But we find a few elements, such as, of course, the issue of the slave trade, which gives powers to states to intervene at any moment when there is a suspicion of slave trade. There is the duty to render assistance, which applies in all maritime zones. And then there are some restrictions on enforcement towards actually fishermen, and the fact that you cannot, there are limitations on detention of crews and vessels when they are arrested for violations. So then you have to look for the protection outside the law of the sea convention, which then it's fragmented depending on the maritime activity that we're looking at, depending on the region, geographical area in which the alleged violation took place also, and eventually the nationality of the flag state and the nationality of the victim. So then you have to kind of put together those elements and build the type of protection which is applicable to the individual.
Okay. And do you think that in the following negotiations, it will be included?
Which negotiation?
Well,
or
in general, like a further, yeah, like.
Well, there is quite an interesting development within the IMO. There were ongoing discussions, and like just a few days ago, apparently they reached some sort of agreement for working conditions in the fishing industry. You have a convention on seafarers also. To be honest, they are not widely ratified and not widely enforced by those who have ratified them. So the situation is not very optimistic. I have to say, I'm looking at it, you have some more optimistic data.
I mean, the law of the sea is more like the management or something, but then ILO, the International Labour Organization, maybe a lot more like conventional recommendation, protocols and standards are more focused on the labor side of the business. So now, for example, the C188, that is the convention 188, fishing, working with fishing, yeah. It's focusing especially on board and of course in order to improve the fishers or fish workers on board, the companies have to ratify the convention so they can implement their national legislation. But yeah, I mean now more and more countries, I mean going I think around 20 countries so far they have ratified this convention. It's not easy because fishery is very complex. It's a very global problem. I mean, before it's not only about one country. As she said, like you have one vessel, you have people from different nationalities, so it's quite complex. But yeah,
if I may add to that also, it's like when you have the regulation of violations or legal conditions of war, it doesn't solve the problem of violations which happen before and after. So often in the fishing industry, even the recruitment phase is problematic with issues of modern forms of slavery and human trafficking, and you lose that bit in a way when the regulation only applies on the rules, yeah. And again, then you have the complicated matrix of the jurisdictional framework, which is created by the Law of the Sea Convention, which might create some obstacles on where the regulation can be applied and by which authority can intervene also, and what type of action the authority can take. So that creates a bit of an issue, and we want to see as a regulatory framework applied at sea. It is not meant to be applied in the interrelation between coast and sea, which seems a bit absurd in a way, because of course you have interaction between the coastal area and the sea in many issues, from the social side to the environmental side, and things about like land source pollution and all that goes into the sea and comes from the land. The Global Sea Convention is not, it has a couple of provisions here and there, but it doesn't have the mechanisms to properly regulate that interaction between land and sea. Also when the human element is included.
And if I may add, remember always that there is a general provision in United Nations Convention on the Sea, which is Article 300 on the good faith, which is very useful because you can link it to any kind of violation you can imagine for a state, because in every case, a state has to behave in good faith. Otherwise, and the decisions we are discussing today are, how can I say, it's a good field of implementation of good faith obligations for states. Any other question? Yes, please.
The first one is, I would like to know your opinion.
The panel's opinion, yeah.
On the accurate effectiveness of like those sustainable fishing certificates that they stamp on, like, I don't know, tuna pens saying, oh, when we fish tuna, we don't kill dolphins. But yeah, I would like to know your opinion if they're true.
How reliable they are,
Yeah. And my second opinion is, I don't know, taking as an example, you know, every year the Faroe Islands, they have their big whale fishing moment, and every year we do, and everyone's very shocked and very concerned. And every year the Faroe Islanders are saying, you know, it's our tradition and our source of food. So how do you balance indigenous rights and sustainable fishing?
Yeah. Can we start from the opposite? How can I say? Yes. No. From the panelists, we start from Federica and then we come back. Tu sei stata l'ultima, quindi sei la prima. Gli ultimi saranno i
We need to repeat the question for the participants online, not here.
Yes, okay. We have two different questions. One is about labels. When you read on a label, this tuna has been caught without endangering environment, without any danger for dolphins and so on. How reliable are these labels? What the panel think about this kind of labels? And the second one is the question of indigenous rights and, of course, the problem of catching whales, for example. You know, we have in the Arctic, I think, especially indigenous population, which for centuries have had this habit, and so there is a sort of indigenous exception. But how can we still have this? When I say this consideration, this possibility of permitting this exception, which is the balance among the complete, how can I say, ban on whaling, taking whales and catching whales, and this possibility. We begin with Federica.
Okay, thank you for your question. From the point of view of the labor, I'm sure that the current labeling are based on a strict regulation and MSC or Friends of the Sea are well-known certification body, which are based also on third parties assessment. Even my logo, Catch and Clean, label catch is coming from vessels cooperating in the fishing for litter. But in my personal view, I put this logo at free disposal of FAO and also of the Italian Coast Guard, because I believe that since the environmental protection is a matter which applies to everyone, it's better to have a public authority which can manage this kind of label in order also to avoid unfair competition. For what I can say about the traditions in Faroe Island, when the rights of environment in the perspective of protecting the future generation is more important than tradition, I think we have to take care of our responsibilities for few generations. And maybe we can avoid to protect traditions like they want.
Thank you very much, Federica. Michele, please.
As for this kind of traditional activities, I can tell you that as long as the amount of killed animal stays the same, there is no problem. Because the population is able to recover. Of course, this is from a strictly ecological viewpoint. I'm reasoning as an animal, not as a man with no ethics, nothing like that. Of course, there are other reasons why something can hurt someone else's sensitivity, okay, so someone else's feelings. And this is also important. But from a strictly ecological viewpoint, as long as you do something and you are able to do the same thing over and over and over again, it's okay. And this is a good way, in my opinion, also to achieve practical sustainability. Any kind of exploitation of natural resources that is able to keep the resources at the same level, as long as the resources are renewable, it's okay. It's a kind of implementation of a strong sustainability framework, because you can have the same resources over and over. This is my viewpoint, but I'm sure that this is only part of the problem.
Thank you. Corrado, please. Don't know what...
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
I mean, honestly, I don't have so much to add to the answers already provided, so I prefer going ahead with the other questions. There is also one specific question for me online, so I will wait for that.
Please answer, yes.
Okay, can I?
Yes, please read the question, and then we give the floor to them.
Absolutely. So the question comes from Alexander Mortelet, and is addressed to me, saying that most of the Tunisian economy relies on exploration of agricultural goods, mine extractions, and manufactural goods like textile. Do you think the lessons you draw from the fishery industry might be expandable to these other sectors? Can we, for example, use your guidelines to address human rights violations in the textile industry in Tunisia? So thanks a lot, Alexander, for the question, because I mean, we started our experience on the fishery value chain, as I told you before, the reason why we selected this specific sector and this specific region, but it could have been also, I mean, another sector or another region if we had enough experience or enough knowledge of the context. That was not the case. So therefore, we are working in Medellin in the fishery value chain. I know that the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights and Avocats Sans Frontières are working here in Tunisia in the textile sector. So you might have more information on the textile sector coming from Avocats Sans Frontières and the Office of the High Commissioner. I would say that the experience that we did is a very sectorial one, because we clearly ask questions that are related to the situation of those working in the fishery value chain. So the context is a little different from the agricultural one. The challenges are totally different, and the possible human rights violations are different. So for sure, we can use a couple of lessons learned from the experience we had in the fishery value chain in order to duplicate the same kind of experience, but basically we have to start from scratch because our approach is very simple and complex at the same time. So we cannot generalize the conclusions that we had in the fishery value chain in Medellin to the same value chain in another region, and not even to another value chain in other regions. So it will be much better and prudent to start from scratch. We now know the methodology. We know most of the national and local stakeholders. So for sure, it will be easier to start the process, even in the agriculture, for example. But the kind of questions that we will ask to the different individuals or focus group might be slightly different. So I would say that it's not wise to use the conclusions that we have from the fishery value chain to just use them to create like a guidelines for promoting the human rights in another value chain like agriculture or textile. But for sure is a good and perfect starting point to do that. And this is also, let's say, one of our goals in the future, in order to have like a puzzle when you have the first one that is already done, is the fishery value chain in Medellin. We might continue working on the agricultural sector, that it is our next step. And then we might continue with the textile, we can continue with the services, security, etc., etc., in order to have a global understanding of the promotion of human rights in Tunisia, in the business, and then be able to accompany the government to create a national plan on business human rights. So, that's
a specific issue, but a good point to start from. Okay, let's come back to labels and whales. Mariana, please can you come here, because otherwise the people online will not.
Okay, so regarding labels, well, in the fishery sector, there's an initiative that is called the Global Seafood Sustainable Initiative, GSSI. But for example, they are a benchmark. They serve as a benchmark tool where all these certification bodies, such as MSC and other type of certification, use their benchmark in order to implement these certifications schemes. And for example, this initiative, the GSSI, they use international tools such as the FAO Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries. So in order to ensure that these certifications work properly. So this is regarding the label question. And then regarding whales, well, I mean, let's have to think. Traditions is one thing, no, and for many of different cultures can be shocking at the whale, these type of traditions. But of course, it's another, let's say, another species, no? While, like, if the country who's doing that, they have a control over the quotas, and then they are respecting the quotas of that particular species, then there's not a problem. I mean, they are respecting the quotas, so the number of species of that particular species, it can be fine. It's not overfished or whatever. So it's, let's think that it's like another type of fish.
But we're speaking of whales, problem is it's one.
Yeah, but
No,
for
there are
example,
no quotas for whales.
well, there's, for example, in Iceland, they do respect whales, and then they do have like this tradition. They eat whales, you know. So they respect the quotas. They conserve like this species. So in that case, it's not a problem.
Thank you. Celine.
Just maybe on the label very briefly, so I think it's a good beginning in a way. But some of those are very good initiatives. At the same time, most of them are private initiatives, and the lack of sort of public control on what are the benchmarks and how they give the labels and so on. I find it problematic, and it's not the only sector in which that happened. I've worked for a while in the oil and gas sector, and this is another. You have the same type of problem when you outsource certification to private entities, which then have an impact on the way in which the actor behavior and participate in the market. They also have, I think, a partial impact because, of course, you can find them in the supermarket, but if you go to the market to buy your fish, you have no clue where the fish comes from and whether it is certified or not. So then it catches a part of the market, but not the full picture, I think, which is a bit of a pity also. So you don't have the same standards depending on whether it's on the supermarket or on the market. About whaling, I agree. I mean, it's of course we all have our morals and our sensitivities. But think about in Italy we have the La Matanza dei Tonni. It's awful. Like tuna fish are plucked, and the sea becomes red of their blood. It's awful. But they're tuna. They are not mammals, and they are not whales. I mean, so I think it's really an issue of sensitivity and cultural sensitivity. But from the moment in which the quotas are respected, I guess, yeah, it's a difficult balance.
Like the corrida in Spain.
Like the corrida in Spain. Yeah, but then it's another, it's not the environmental dimension which is relevant. It's more an issue of ethics and morals and rights of the animals. So the fact of killing an animal, making it suffer, which is then a broader discourse that we have also in the food industry on land, and the way in which our chicken and cows are killed in the food industry is not much better. And the conditions of living in the plant are awful. Everything which is mass produced is like, so then it's a broader discourse which of course applies on land and at sea.
Thank you very much. I do not know, I asked for the organizer to say no. So there is no time. So we finish here. Thank you very much for your participation, and thank you especially to the panelists. I think they have done an excellent work. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Perché? Devo scappare.